Now we can speak to Andrew Gilligan, who's Senior Fellow at Policy Exchange. They were the ones who had this report leaked to them. Andrew, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Why do you suspect this was leaked to you in particular?
I think the person who leaked it was concerned that we were massively going away from the real threat, which is Islamism and to a lesser extent the far right, and targeting other phenomenon which in some ways disturbing, things like violence against women or whatever, but one are not extremism. And I think there was concern that the already quite stretched resources of the police and counter-extremism interveners would be massively further overstretched if all these other things were also made part of their remit.
The bit that is a bit confusing is what Claire mentioned there, that the Prime Minister said just last week, wasn't it, that terrorism has changed, and he made a big point of that. In fact, we can play a little bit of that clip just to remind some of our listeners. It was something we talked about a lot on the programme, but this obviously followed the sentence of Axel Ruda-Cabana, the Southport attacker. Let's hear what the Prime Minister said.
Terrorism has changed. In the past, the predominant threat was highly organised groups with clear political intent, groups like Al-Qaeda. That threat, of course, remains. But now, alongside that, we also see acts of extreme violence perpetrated by loners, misfits, young men in their bedroom, accessing all manner of material online, desperate for notoriety.
That is a bit confusing, isn't it? You know, not just Al-Qaeda, not just far-right extremists, loners, misfits, and this review seems to be suggesting in part that we need to focus on people just like that.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure that that this review was driven in part by the facts of Southport, which presumably were known to the people writing it before they were known to the rest of us. And I think, but I think the risk is that what it does is they confuse extreme violence with extremism and terrible acts like Southport with terrorism. But, you know, terrorism is an act designed to terrorize a community or a section of the community for political ends. And you know, and extreme, you know, the threat of extremism, terrorism is a threat to the security of the country and its democratic system and its values and its institutions. And it's not just a really horrible and appalling crime that we could have done more to prevent in other ways. So I think what Starmer's done there, he's confused two forms of horrible activities, confused terrorism and extremism with the kind of awful violence we saw.
Isn't part of the problem, though, that a lot of those things come together in some cases, as we saw in the case of Axel Ruda-Cabana? You know, there are examples of other men, an example, Daniel Hussein, who had extreme far-right views, also extreme misogynistic views, and he went on to murder two sisters in Blackheath. You know, do you recognise there are often links in the background of some of these people between different elements of extreme ideology?
So there are, you know, terrible and ghastly crimes are committed, but they're not necessarily terrorism or extremism. And it's true that so Axel Ruda-Cabana, for instance, the murderer in Southport, he did have a fixation with violence, but he didn't have an ideology. He didn't want to bring down the state. He didn't want to damage the democratic institutions of the country, at least as far as we know. And I think that's the difference. That's why it shouldn't be under extremism. But really,
so how do we focus on those people? You know, those particular challenges, if it's not in the context of a counter-extremism strategy, ultimately.
What's been suggested here? So I do think so that the trial judge, in fact, said this, that trying to define whether this was or wasn't terrorism is sort of beside the point. In any operationally effective policing system, this guy's behaviour would have, you know, obviously we know that for several years before he killed anyone, he had come to the authorities' attention very regularly for doing things which showed him to be clearly dangerous. Now, in the same way as somebody who, you know, makes a living out of ram raiding shops or stealing people's mobile phones, you would hope at some point the police would catch up with them in the normal criminal way. And that's what should have happened here. And it's a mistake to try and think that you can't deal with him unless you somehow
No, but they
are able to
tried, but they almost didn't know how to categorise him,
Well,
did they?
but
When he was
that- well,
referred
that's-
to prevent, for example.
Yeah, I know, but why do you need to categorise him? You just say, look, this guy is plainly dangerous. He came to his school with a baseball bat with the intention of harming pupils. We should do something about that. You know, the problem was this kind of bureaucratic need to pin a label on him, in this case extremism, which didn't really fit. And we should just... We should. I mean, I agree with Neil Basu, who's a former counter-terrorism commander at the Met, and with Jonathan Hall, who's the independent review of terrorism legislation, both of whom have said this week that trying to expand the whole extremism space to capture these kind of people is a mistake, that it was overburdening the police and the counter-extremism police, counter-terrorism police, and that actually what we need is a kind of non-extremism version of prevent, that enables us to interdict these people and stop them if we can. I mean, I don't think we ever can guarantee to stop every maniac like Ruda Kabbalah, but if we can, and do it better than we've done in the past.
Thank you very much indeed. Andrew Gilligan, Senior Fellow at Policy Exchange. Just